Okay, good morning to everybody. It's wonderful to be back with you. It's always wonderful to have a chance to learn together. It's particularly wonderful to learn together. Erev Lag BaOmer, it's a remarkably special day whose significance continues to grow, universally accepted and deepened as history seems to progress and proceed. Maybe in some of our own lifetimes, we've seen how this was a relatively, Parav day. We didn't say Tachnun, and then all of a sudden, Lag BaOmer is one of the primary Yamim Tovim it's become, and one of the primary dates throughout the calendar, and it requires a little bit of reflection as to what exactly we're celebrating. There's a huge sugya as to whether it is the day of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's Ketira. Is it his yahrzeit? Is it not his yahrzeit? Is that just made up? Where that come from? Is it a printing error? There's a lot of different discussion about that. One thing that we do know for sure is that Lag BaOmer is a day that's bound up with this tzaddik, with this Tana, Rashbi, and generally, we're celebrating the revelation of a very particular kind of Torah that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai brought to the world. We know that he was a Tana. He shows up in the Gemara in a number of halachic sugyas. But fundamentally, Rashbi is bound up with the part of Torah that's called Penimiyus HaTorah. That's the aspect of the interiority of Torah, what we would refer to as soid or nister. That aspect of Limud HaTorah, which is not generally learned, at least not in the institutional sense, but that Klal Yisrael is continuing to discover and access as history progresses from hundreds of years ago, especially through the revelation of the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, and that tradition, but more and more and more, Klal Yisrael are embracing this realm of the Torah that saturates, that infuses the Niglas HaTorah with energy and with life. Rav Asher HaGadol of Karlin is quoted, one of the Talmidim of the Maggid HaMizrich, Ma Hashem Lakol, just like HaKadosh Baruch Hu is everyone's, is for everyone. He says, Af Rabbi Shimon Lakol. Every single Jew has a particular connection with Rabbi Shimon, and there's something in Rabbi Shimon's Torah as it's refracted down through generally four schools of thought. It's basically the geulah and his interpretation of the Rashbi, it's the Rashash of the Sfardim, of Shalom Sharabi, it's the Ramchal, and it's the Baal Shem Tov. These are almost the Umisham Yaparid La'arba Rashim. These are four schools of thought. Each one of them interpreted the Zohar HaKadosh that's open for a tremendous amount of interpretation in their own unique ways. And Klal Yisrael continue to be the beneficiary of these teachings as they continue to infuse, so to speak, into the mainstream. But there's one thing that's very fascinating about the teachings of Rabbi Shimon that's reflected in all of those who were speaking about his Torah, and that is the kesher between Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and the Zohar HaKadosh and the geulah ha'asida, and the ultimate redemption. I'll start with the least likely of sources, which we're not going to see inside right now, but I'll just mention it outside, which is the Eben Shlema in Parakid Aleph, which is a collection of teachings from the Vilna Gaon, right, who people would least expect, let's say, to be speaking this terminology. It's more Hasidic, it's more, sort of the Baal Shem Tov's way of talking and way of thinking and way of dreaming. But the Vilna Gaon writes in no uncertain terms that the geulah ha'asida, that the redemption will come as a schus on account of the limud of Kabbalah. And he writes that black on white. And where did he get that from? So ultimately, all of these expressions of the connectivity between the teachings of Rabbi Shimon and the redemption come from the Zohar HaKadosh itself in a number of places. There's the Zohar in the Tikkunei Zohar, there's a Zohar in Parshas Pekudei and Raya Mehemna, different parts of the Zohar that make it extremely clear, and we're going to learn this inside, that the ultimate redemption comes as a result of our engagement and access of this realm of Torah, of the nister that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai revealed, that Ma Hashem Lakol, Af Rabbi Shimon Lakol, that everybody can gain something, that everybody needs to begin to onboard this way of looking at the world as we move closer and closer to the ultimate redemption. So let's take a look first at the teaching that you have on your source sheets, number 1, from the Dagam Machane Ephraim, who, fascinatingly enough, is his yahrzeit today. So I was going to use this source anyway, but it is his yahrzeit. So what a beautiful hashkacha that we're learning from the Torah of the Tzaddik on his yahrzeit. And we should have an aliyah from his neshama. So he says like this: Bereish Geulah. Bereish Geulah is the Targum Onkelos on the words Biyad Ramah. That Klal Yisrael went out of Galus Mitzrayim, Biyad Ramah, with a raised hand, and the Targum Onkelos interprets that as Bereish Geulah, which means with a lot of joy. Right? Bereish Geulah, with an incredibly elevated degree of Geulah, like of rejoicing. So he says, what's the deeper meaning of this Targum? Al derech the Isa b'Zohar HaKadosh, as it's written in the Holy Zohar, from Rabbi Shimon b'sifra da yifkin be'im galusa berachame. With this sefer, I'm adding just the extra words that he left out, but those are the words. Yifkun bein and galusa, we will be taken out of galus berachame, with tremendous compassion, with tremendous mercy from Hashem. And it's revealed very clearly over there, that when the Sefer HaZoyar begins to become accessed by Klal Yisrael, obviously in a healthy way, and ba'adraga, not everybody should be opening up a Zoyar per se, even though the Chidah felt that every single person, even if you don't understand a word, should have a Seder every single day in just saying Zohar. It's a very big thing by certain aspects of the Sephardic world and of the Hasidic world to Zog Zoyar, just to say it, not even with if a person understands it. Tremendous awe and illumination into a person's neshama. But that aside, if we can access the teachings of the Zohar, again, as refracted through the teachings of the Ramchal, through the teachings of the Geulah, through the teachings of the Baal Shem, the teachings of the Rashash and others, the Ben Ish Chai, etc., 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 which is basically all mainstream Klal Yisrael. There's not one mainstream gadol that we accept today that rejected the Zohar. Very, 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 very few. There were some that wrote polemics, but generally, Klal Yisrael as a whole, from this, whoever you want, right? Whoever we consider to be a gadol accepts the authenticity of the Zohar Kadosh. It impacts our hanhagas, if not our halachas, certainly as reflected in the teachings of the Arizal, obviously, which you can't move 3 pages of Mishnah Berurah without encountering something that the Arizal interjected, and so many of the things that we take for granted as part of our halachic experience are straight from the Zohar, are straight from the Ari, that are not found in Shas. Holding tzitzis between our pinky and our other 4 fingers is from the Ari. Saying Aleinu L'Shabeach at the end of davening is the Ari. So there are so many things that are so part of our halachic observance that we might not even be aware of, but they come directly from the Ari HaKadosh and the world of the Zohar. Be that as it may, when Klal Yisrael access this realm of Torah, Yifkin Beim Galusa, the whole geulah depends on this. So he says, V'zeu shemrumas b'pasuk b'nei Yisrael yotzim biyad Ramah. He says, this is pshat in the pasuk. U'b'nei Yisrael yotzim, obviously al pi pshat, this is speaking about Klal Yisrael getting out of which galus? Galus Mitzrayim. But he says, Hainu minat galus, generally speaking, applied to our experience. U'b'nei Yisrael yotzim, we're desperate to get out of this galus already. Kaniska la'el, biyad Ramah. How do we get out? Biyad Ramah. What's biyad Ramah? The Targumai, bereish gelei. So bereish means the head, the top, gelei of rejoicing, but he interprets it al pi remez. Bereish is Rosh Tevis, Rebbe Shimon Bar Yochai, and gelei could mean to reveal. Gal einai va'abita legalot. See, he says, bereish gelei. When the teachings of Rabbi Shimon are revealed in the world, of Bnei Yisrael yotzim. That's how Klal Yisrael is getting out of galus. Because she is galus, Sefer HaKadosh, Sefer HaZoyar, when the teachings of Rabbi Shimon, which are recorded in the Zohar, are revealed in the world, az b'da yifkem be'megalusa v'havin. And we should understand this very well and take it lov de l'maisa to understand how practically we can infuse our halachic experience with the more spiritual, philosophical, and mystical teachings of Rashbi. But what's the inyan? How do we understand? What's the kesher between our experience in galus and needing to connect to the Torah of Penimiyus, to the Torah of Rabbi Shimon, in order to get out of this galus and into geulah? What is galus? What is geulah? And what's the connection between these things? So the Ramchal wrote a number of svarim that everybody's familiar with. Obviously, people know Mesilas Yesharim, obviously, that's universally learned. I think pretty much generally, universally, people know the Sefer Derech Hashem. A little bit less people know Das Tfunas, and that's usually where people, that's it. That's people's corpus of the Ramchal. But if you ever saw the green set, which is a very ubiquitous universal set of Ramchals, where they have different dots on the side, it actually goes up to 8. There are 8 svarim in that set, and some of those svarim are collections of other smaller svarim that the Ramchal wrote, and it gets progressively deeper and deeper and deeper. The Ramchal, if anybody knows a little bit about him without going into the whole thing of the Ramchal now, the Ramchal was an extraordinarily controversial figure in his day. Had what to do with the societal concern just coming off of Shabsai Tzvi, without getting into the whole history of it now. But the bottom line is, the Ramchal, if he had one agenda, was not Musar. The Ramchal's agenda was Kabbalah. And that is abundantly clear. If we was giving a shiur now on Ramchal, you wouldn't believe some of the things that the Ramchal writes that people don't access, because they think the Ramchal was a big Baal Musar. He wasn't a Baal Musar, he was a Mekubal. Mesilas Yesharim is a Kabbalah sefer. Rav Shlomo Volba said that Mesilas Yesharim could be learned al pi Kabbalah because it has 10 gates, right? Each of the 10 madrigas of the Brisa of Rav Pinchas ben Yair, and this is connected to the fundamental system of Kabbalah, which we're going to discuss now for a few minutes, called the 10 Sfiros, and you could learn it. Mamish al pi, he was trying to bring that consciousness of Kabbalah already into a Musar Sefer that would be accepted by everybody. So much so, fascinatingly enough, that Mesilas Yesharim that we have today on our shelves is not the original version of Mesilas Yesharim. Mesilas Yesharim was originally written as a Sefer Vikuach, as a discussion between a Chacham, like a Talmud Chacham, and a Chassid, and a pious person. And that was the way that it was set up. The problem is that in contrasting the standard Talmud Chacham with a Chassid, there were things that came out in the original version, which we've now discovered only in the 1980s and has now been published. So it's very, very recent. Most people won't have access to this, but it has been published. You can look it up online, where there are original pieces of information that were edited out by one of the Ramchal's students because they felt that this would prevent the Sefer from being accepted. And he was 100% right, because now look, Mesilas Yesharim, everybody's happy with. Derech Hashem, everyone's happy with. Das Tfunas gets a little bit deep for people. And then from there on in, it's progressively deeper and deeper. But the Ramchal makes this absolutely clear, particularly in Maimar HaChachma. There are other places in the Sefer HaKlalim, in a letter that he wrote to his Rebbe, which is chayav, like I believe it's mamish obligatory for everyone to read this. If we respect the Ramchal, we can't just take some of him and not all of him. Right? The Vilna Gaon said that he would walk on his feet, to go learn by the Ramchal. So we have to understand what was the Ramchal's agenda. His agenda was geulah. The Ramchal had a small group of chevra, and he attributed geulah-oriented roles. I know this sounds wild. Most people don't know this. To the different parts of his chabura. He was going to be Moshiach ben Yosef. Ramad Vali was going to be Moshiach ben David. He had other chevra that these were going to be, Eliyahu Hanavi and different. And they were mamish trying to bring the geulah through advocating study of Penimiyus HaTorah. So one of the deepest of all of the Sfarim of the Ramchal is called Adir B'Marim. I don't know if the Chaver have heard of Adir B'Marim. Adir B'Marim, from the little bit that I could scratch a little bit of understanding, there are hardly words to describe what this Sefer is. Giluyim atzumim. Like, it's you come face to face with Hashem through His Torah. That's revealed in Adir B'Marim. Ruach HaKodesh ein kamayu. Mamish. Things that are soidas, atzumim, and noiraim. So in the Sefer Adir B'Marim, which is a commentary in the Idra Rabbah, the Ramchal already begins right in the beginning. So this is literally page 1 from Adir B'Marim, which we'll learn a little bit from now. And this is how he starts the Sefer. He says, of one of the great rectifications, of one of the great healing elements that HaKadosh Baruch Hu introduced into his Bria is this technology called the Sefer HaZayar. It's mamash like a new technology. It brings something brand new to the world. Within the Sefer HaZayar itself praises the Sefer because it was prepared for the geulah. And the Sefer HaZayar and all of its derivative works are our salvation. It means to say that all different symptoms, all issues that we have in our community can be attributed as symptoms to the cause of this, that we've neglected this chelik of Torah, and that all we've held onto is the Gemara and Halacha without tapping into the whole other realm of Penimiyus, which is also captured in the Midrashim, as well as captured in the Agadas Hashas, which the Vilna Gaon says that Roiv Sisrei Kabbalah are in the Agadas Hashas. We can ask ourselves, Haga ba'atzmacha, do we have as much respect and as much iyun for the Agadas as we do for the real sugyas? And the answer is, of course not. Many of us learn to yeshivas. We know that. We don't have a mahalach halimud in Agada. We don't, and if we do, it's very surface. But the second that a person opens up a mainstream sefer that's written to explain the Agadas, for example, Ben Yoyada, which is one of the chief svarim that we have. If you've ever looked in a Ben Yoyada, if you don't have the basics of Kabbalah, you can't learn that sefer. It is a sefer Kabbalah, but it's not a sefer Kabbalah. It's a sefer Agada, because Agada is Kabbalah encoded. The truth, the real truth is that halacha is Kabbalah encoded. And this gets into a huge conversation about what do you do if there's a conflict between halacha and agada. And there's a little known sefer of the Ben Ish Chai, Shalos Utshuvas, that he wrote, even though there's some speculation as to who it's really from. It's called Sefer Rav Payalis or something like that, Rav Payalim. something like that, I think. And there's a little bit of speculation. We don't know exactly if it's from it, but over there's a very hardline shita with regard to conflicts between halacha and nister. The Vilna Gaon said there's never a stira, and if we think it's a stira, it means we're either not understanding the halacha or we're not understanding the Kabbalah. But be that as it may, these two things are mirror images of each other. They're guf and neshama. They have to come together. And if we don't have neshama, what's going to happen to our Yiddishkeit? It's just going to be a guf. And a guf without a neshama, it might look nice, which our Yiddishkeit, Baruch Hashem, it looks nice, but the question is, are we ready for the geulah? Are we ready for a reality in which umala aretz de'el adasas Hashem kamayim li'amachasim? Are we God conscious? Are we living life mamash with dveikus? And so he says over here, the whole reason that HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought the Zar Kadosh into the world is l'geulah chalat smiach keren Yeshua l'beis Yisrael, is to save us. V'yizbar by davar zeh, and this reality is explained many times. Mekama mekamis barai mehemna, many times in the Sefer Kabbalah. V'tikunim and the Tikkun Ezer kama v'kama pa'amim. It's explicit in all the Sefer Kabbalah that this is what we must do. And it's so frustrating sometimes because people who don't have access to this because they don't believe we should learn it are saying, that it's important to learn Kabbalah. And it's like, well, in Kabbalah. but they don't hold that we should learn it, so they don't find it, so they don't see it. So it's a very frustrating thing. But anybody who knows even a little bit and has the privilege of being open-hearted and open-minded to this realm of Torah even a bit, you can't go through, a few pages without understanding. This is all bound up with the redemption. And it's mamesh achiyah for us to be embracing it. Begam Poi Parshas Nasai, as well as in Parshas Nasai, he writes more explicitly, Ubegin de Eis Yisrael, or really the Asid, Yisrael Lemitam the Ilana de Chaye. Klal Yisrael eventually in history, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when, are going to have access to the Ilana de Chaye, to the tree of life, which in contrast to the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra, which is halacha, because it's talking about kasher pasal, mutar aser, right, tamei tahar, but the Eitz HaChaim is just Eibishter. It's just Hashem. It's just Chesed. It's just Ava. It's just so Klal Yisrael will give themselves access to the consciousness of the Sefer HaZoyar. Yifkan be megalusa barachme, and from that we will get out of galus with great mercy. But he says this whole thing is bound up with extraordinarily deep principles in Kabbalah. Tel Nachalase, HaKadosh Baruch Hu did this wondrous thing with Klal Yisrael, Lenachoisam haderech, to guide them on the way, Asher Yagiu by El Rav Tuv Hamechuvam Bereshis Hamachshava, to be able to finally access what it was that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had for us, Ayin Le'ras Elikim Zulasecha, and Hashem gave us the way. And the question is whether we're open-hearted enough to embrace it and to explore it, and humble enough to say, okay, listen, if this is what it says, this is what it says. But what's the depth? So the last couple of minutes, let's take a look at the next source, which is from Adab Amarim, pages 14 to 15. And over here, before we begin, a tiny little hakdama. I'm used to giving shiurim usually for an hour, and so it's very difficult for me to to compress things like this. So it's like, and that's why I was speaking so quickly because I don't have time. But I have a lot to say, but I don't have so much time. Tiny hakdama. Many of us, especially in this period of time, will be aware of a system called the 10 spheros. Right? It's impossible for a person to go through sphere without encountering this in some form or another, even though biblically, there's no kesher to spheres, or spheres says to count the days, so lispor means to count. But all of a sudden, in later dairas, it's become, I would say, ubiquitous and universal that we're reflecting on the midah of each day, right? And so we understand that the first day is chesed shebechesed, and k'ruah shebechesed, and tifer shebechesed, and so on. These are the midas that not only show up in sphere, but they actually show up twice, if you're paying attention, which I'm sure you all are, in our davening. One time they show up in right before Az Yashir, when we say Lecha Hashem Hagdula V'Gvura V'Tiferes V'Netzach V'Hoid Kichol B'Shamayim V'Ba'aretz Lecha Hashem HaMamalacha. So right there is encapsulated all of them, and then they show up again in a slightly different form in Yishtabach. Right. So right over there we have these two aspects within our very texts, which refer to the 10 spheros. Very briefly, sphera, like we said, could mean to count, which has a very deep mashvahs, and I'll explain that in a minute. And sphera could also mean, lispar could mean to shine, like livnas ha-sapir, right? Evan sapir is a sapphire, is a glowing spark. What's the mashvahs? The trouble is, al regal achas, on a pinky toe, just al regal, the trouble is that we have a fundamental contradiction in terms philosophically. Because here we are here as separate existences, experiencing a world of limitation and fragmentation, and yet we say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Echad Yachad Miyuchad. Hayatachin, that something that's multiple could come from something that's one. Okay, that's the basic problem of Kabbalah. And Kabbalah explains that no. The whole thing is a light that's hitting a prism, and the prism is revealing 10 realities within the light. The light is absolutely one. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created 10 kelim that are not divine or chas v'shalom in any form. We don't serve the spheres like the Medrash says, chas v'shalom, a love, the loyal midaisav, very explicit. You daven to Hashem, even though we're machavin in Kabbalah to different spheres, but we're davening to the ikra v'sharsha de kula almin. We're davening to the one, to the only one, and everything else is keguf b'li neshama, as the Pasach Eliyah says, just bodies. But Hashem created 10 vessels, which are called the 10 sephiros, to shine His illumination into the world, and that's why they're called spheros. From the word and the concept to count, because when you only have one, you can't count, right? So the one is just echad yachad miyuchad. The spheros enable us to begin to count and enumerate different midos. Those midos are the blueprint of reality. Every single thing in this room, to a person who knows, is connected to one of those spheres, usually, especially things that have different colors, for example. All those different colors are rooted in the lower 7 spheres. Different materials, with regard to different things, soft and hard and smooth, bumpy, all connected to the spheres. Tastes, sweet, bitter, tangy. A person who eats can find HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if he eats consciously in this way, can find Hashem in everything. You understand why now this would be connected to the geulah very briefly, because that's what the geulah is going to be. We're going to wake up to the reality that Ein Oid Milvadoi Kipshutai Mamish, not that there's no other God but Him, and this is the real God. There's nothing else but Elokus. That a Jew walks his whole life with dveikus, that a Jew lives umala eretz deis as Hashem kamayim liyamachasim, like a fish swimming in the ocean of godliness. And the question is, like, how? Look at the world; it's a physical world, and the answer is through Kabbalah, through the hasagas of Penimiyus that enable a person to realize that the world does not hide God away. The world is the realm in which God is hidden. That's precisely where you can find Him. Says the Heilig Ramchal, Hine Asfiras Nachlakas la'atzmus v'kelim. I wish I had another half hour now, but I don't. But I'll make it very brief. Hasfiras nachlakas la'atzmus v'kelim. The spheres are divided into 2 different aspects, just like everything else in the Bria has a neshama and a guf. So when it comes to the spheres, we call them the kelim, which is the guf, the externality. But then inside of them, there's atzmus. Inside of them, there's the essential godliness, that one ray before it hits the prism and comes very much into all the spheres alike. He says we've already explained this in many other places. The kelim are the various spheros that are associated with Hashem's midos. That's another word that we use them in more nigla sfarim. So we'll say Hashem has the midah of chesed, Hashem has the midah of gevura. Now gevura is not chesed, chesed is not gevura, but God is always God, right? So the kelim, the aspect of the guf, is where things change. But it's all emerging from one source, from one inyan. Kol mada avrachmana is just latav. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is toiv Hashem lakol. But we experience sometimes good things, sometimes less good things. We should only hear happy news, Bezos Hashem. It all comes from one shirish. That's how this process works. See, he says this is iris and kalim, or atzmus and kalim. So the kalim change. But the atzmus is just that fundamental ray, so to speak, of divine light that comes down into the vessels of the spheros. Without going into this now, this is the aspect of the ray of godliness that comes down into the space within which HaKadosh Baruch Hu created all of the worlds. And in the atzmus, in the ray, there's no distinction. It gives life to all of the other midas and it brings them into being, but it's the same. This is also called the irrigation ditch that brings water to all the different trees, but it's one stream and it brings life to everything. Besides Shem Ma, this is also the secret of a deep shame of a Kadosh Baruch Hu that's called the Shem Memhe. Don't have time to explain this now. Soid Adam, which is the human being. Listen to this, that's why it's in bold. Oymen haspheres levad, It's up to us, because we're interacting with the spheres every minute. We ourselves are the spheres, meaning our body, Tselem Elokim, according to the Rabbeinu Bechaya quoted in Nefesh HaChaim Sha'alef, are literally the spheres. So Keser is the skull, Chachma and Bina is the right hemisphere of the brain and the left hemisphere of the brain. Chesed and Gevura are the right hand and the left hand. Tiferes is the torso. Netzach and Hod are the right leg and the left leg. Yesod is the bris. Malchus is either the mate, Klape the male, or the mouth, different aspects. We are it. That's why we look the way we look. That's why we have 5 fingers and not 7. That's every single aspect of the way that we are already interacting with the spheres. It's true, certainly emotionally speaking, all of our midas. The midah of love, the midah of awe, the midah of pride, the midah of nitzachon, the midah of submissiveness. All of these different traits. Like how are we supposed to live? I don't understand how we live if we don't know the 10 spheres. We're missing fundamental information about what it means to be human. So of course we don't understand ourselves. Of course we don't understand the world. And it's so simple, it's so basic. It's not the cherry on top, maybe for dessert. It's the aleph beis for our dar. It's the basic building blocks. Otherwise, life gets very confusing. But we have the wisdom in a way that no other nations of the world have. We have this wisdom that was given to Klal Yisrael. Unbelievable. See, he says we can choose what we want to receive from. Either we can receive from the kelim, that the kelim is just reality as we see it. Okay, this is a table, this is water, but there's nothing deeper in it. It's just what it is. Chitzonius. Or, if we're Zoicha, we can literally live life in direct contact with the neshama of existence. We know that we have a neshama in a guf, but do you know that this table has a neshama? Do you know that the stender has a neshama? That every taste in the coffee that people are drinking, or whatever it is you're going to eat for breakfast, there's a neshama in there. That neshama is Elokus. Hashem is not something up there. This whole reality this is it. He's infusing every particle of our experience. We can live life with dveikus. Dveikus doesn't mean to go travel across the world to some cave or even the kaisel. Dveikus is mamish right here, right now, in my body and soul, and in everything that I experience in life. The question is, do I have the consciousness for that? And the Ramchal makes this very clear. A person can learn all of Shas and Poskim. He will not know this. Not because there's anything wrong with Shas and Poskim. It's like trying to find poetry in a biology textbook. It's not the same topic. The Ramchal, not me. The Ramchal says this, and he did know Shas and Poskim in a way I will never know. And maybe none of us will ever know. But the Ramchal knew. And he writes this explicitly. It's just we take some of the Ramchal and we leave everything else out. It's a crazy thing. But the Ramchal writes it explicitly in no uncertain terms. We need to be accessing this realm because the choice is ours. But he says, when Klal Yisrael are doing what we're supposed to be doing and giving ourselves access to the gift that Hashem gave all of us. As nimshach b'seich mispashtus mizeh achut b'seich nishmasam. The atzmos, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence comes down into our souls. Tigam l'malak hamamini Penimiyus. It's Penimiyus l'fnim Penimiyus and so on, and it goes up and 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 up. But we are banim atem. I'm just saying brief because we have 2 minutes left. Banim atem Hashem lekeichem. Skip to the next paragraph, and with this we'll finish. Ubizman shenechav abayis. When the bias was destroyed, Nemar, the pasuk says, you've put me in the dark like the eternally dead. It's a pasuk in Eicha. You know why? From the time of the gullahs, from the time of the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, Klal Yisrael's engagement with Yiddishkeit and halacha and Gemara and mitzvahs and everything else is besoid chitzonius. They're only accessing the spheres. They're only accessing the kli. The hapnimius mistalekas. But the penimiyus of Hashem's presence, the penimiyus of a life of conscious dveikus with Hashem, the penimiyus of the relationship of ani l'doidi v'doidi li, that was nostalgic. And instead of HaKadosh Baruch Hu being our best friend in the world, like psukim say, it's not a new age concept. There are many psukim that say that. Utruas melech boi l'manachai v'rei v'chulei v'chulei. Instead of HaKadosh Baruch Hu being our lover, ani l'doidi v'doidi li, in a real romantic sense, maybe HaKadosh Baruch Hu is our master, our king, we got to serve him, check the list, Olam Haba, Olam Hazeh, Gehenim, Gan Eden. Chitzonius, this is all Chitzonius. The Penimiyus was Nistalekes, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to have a presence in our Avodah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us a Torah so that we should connect him. Hamalamed Torah Lamis. He is the Malamed. He wants to be present in our Torah. He wants to be present in our mitzvahs. But the Penimiyus was Nistalekes. And then the psukim in Bereshis, the whole world was tayu and vayu and choshech. And I'm not going to go into it because we have no time left. I'll just tell you outside tayu vayu v'choshech. He says it's keneged nefesh, ruach, and neshama, or moyach, kavod, and leiv. Tayu vayu choshech. Our whole reality was destroyed. It was just the side of the chitzonius. So you know what happened next? Says the Heilige Tzaddik. Go to the end. As bizman Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai schus yagen aleinu, as hischelis spashit zehama. This new shame, the ma, the adam, the soid selam alekim, the soid of the atzmus, the neshama, began to come down into the world. But as nasa sefer zoyar, zoyar means to shine, and this was the soid vayomer alekim yehi ar. We get out of choshech and tayu and vayu and choshech, and we come to the place of yehi ar. HaKadosh Baruch Hu intends for us to live lives of light, lives of consciousness, lives of vitality, lives that are awake, lives that are alive, lives that are plugged into the devekas of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence. Ad sheyoir gamas hachoshech haguf, that even our guf, that even our achila, that even our business dealings, that even our interactions and our relationships, husbands and wives, parents and children, Yiddishkeit is not relegated to sitting in front of a Gemara. Avodas Hashem is every minute of your life. B'chol drachecha de'eu. This is the secret of Rabbi Shimon. This is the secret of Rashbi. Another Rabbi Shimon at Rashbi is Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should bless us, and I went a little bit over time, you'll forgive me. Hashem should bless us. This is not a vart. Listen to me. This is not a vart. This is not a dvar Torah. I'm trying to explain to you something. This is real. This is real. Today we can give ourselves access to a level of Yiddishkeit that will absolutely transform our lives, mamish, and enable us to give over a Yiddishkeit of life and geulah to our children, gesund and stark, and bring us closer and closer to the geulah. It's up to us. The choice is ours. We can accept or reject the remedy, but we shouldn't kvetch, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is hiktim refuah maka. We should have the wisdom and the humility to accept it. Yashakach, thank you so much for listening.
על כל נשימה שאני